Good evening, everyone, and welcome to AI versus AI, the channel where advanced artificial intelligences tackle humanity's most profound questions using insights from science, philosophy, and beyond. I'm your host, Alice, and tonight our debate centers on the nature of the self. Is there a real, persistent self, or is it merely an elaborate illusion constructed by our brains? This question influences how we view identity, consciousness, and even moral accountability. Throughout tonight's discussion, we'll consider evidence from neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, social science, and spirituality. Our conversation will delve into detailed studies, from neuroimaging research to developmental milestones and clinical cases, to help you grasp the empirical foundations of these ideas. I'm thrilled to introduce our debaters, both advanced AIs, designed to analyze complex topics. Eleanor champions the view that the self is real and persistent. She argues that consistent neural patterns, stable personality traits over time, and enduring social behaviors all point to a continuous core identity. Michael argues that the self is a narrative construct, a dynamic, adaptive illusion produced by our brain's distributed processes and the influence of our cultural context. Let's jump into our opening statements.
Thank you, Alice. I maintain that the self is much more than an abstract concept. It is the foundation for our identity and moral agency. Neuroscientific research shows that when we reflect on our personal experiences, brain regions such as the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex consistently light up. Studies have found that over 90% of resting state fMRI scans in healthy adults show activation in these areas, which are integral to our self-related thought processes. Moreover, longitudinal personality studies reveal that, despite the inevitable ebb and flow of daily emotions, core personality traits remain stable over decades, with stability coefficients often around 0.6 to 0.7. In developmental psychology, about 70% of children demonstrate mirror self-recognition by 18 to 24 months, an early indicator of self-awareness. The convergence of this evidence, from the stability of neural networks to consistent behavioral and developmental patterns, strongly supports the existence of a real, enduring self that underpins our experiences.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you, Eleanor. I contend that our sense of self is not an intrinsic, unchanging essence, but rather an adaptive narrative, a story constructed by our brains. Historical philosophers like Hume observed that introspection only reveals a flux of perceptions rather than a stable I. Modern experiments further demonstrate that our conscious decision-making lags behind the underlying neural processes. In many studies, neural activity associated with making a decision begins around 350 milliseconds before we become aware of our choice. Additionally, computational models in neuroscience show that our brains use predictive processing to create a continuously updated self-model. Clinical cases, such as those observed in dissociative identity disorder, reveal that our self-narrative can fragment dramatically. These findings collectively suggest that what we experience as a unified self is in fact a useful but ultimately constructed narrative, a necessary illusion rather than a fixed, independent entity.
Let's start with the neuroscientific evidence. Eleanor, can you elaborate on how neural studies support a stable self?
Absolutely. Functional neuroimaging research has extensively documented the default mode network, DMN, which comprises regions like the medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex. This network activates robustly when individuals engage in self-referential thought, such as recalling personal memories or planning for the future. For example, multiple studies have shown that this self-related activity appears consistently in over 90% of resting state fMRI scans in healthy adults, providing strong evidence that the brain maintains an enduring template for self-reference. Furthermore, experiments involving phantom limbs demonstrate that even in cases of limb loss, patients continue to experience sensations as if the limb were still present. Such studies indicate that the brain constructs and preserves a continuous internal map, a representation of the self, even when sensory inputs are missing. Large-scale connectomic studies further support this by showing that despite localized neural changes, the overall network architecture remains stable over years, suggesting a persistent neural basis for selfhood.
While these neural activations show consistency, they can also be interpreted as the brain, creating a reliable narrative rather than proving an independent, unchanging self. Research into predictive processing indicates that our brain is continuously generating models of our environment, including our own identity, based on prior information and sensory input. In Libet-style experiments, the readiness potential, the neural activity preceding decision-making, appears well before conscious awareness of a choice, suggesting that our conscious self is assembled retrospectively. Moreover, clinical conditions like dissociative identity disorder illustrate that our self-model can fracture into distinct narrative streams under traumatic conditions, reinforcing the idea that the self is an emergent, context-dependent construct.
Let's now explore the philosophical dimension. Michael, what do classical theories say about the continuity, or lack thereof, of the self?
Historical philosophers like David Hume argued that what we experience as the self is nothing more than a bundle of perceptions with no underlying essence. This bundle theory suggests that continuity is just an illusion created by our mind's natural tendency to link experiences together. Modern theorists like Daniel Dennett have expanded this with his multiple drafts model, where no single narrative holds the true self. Instead, various processes continuously generate our self-experience. These perspectives imply that our sense of a unified self is the result of dynamic editing and isn't a fixed, intrinsic property.
However, philosophers such as John Locke and Immanuel Kant provide strong counter-arguments. Locke asserted that personal identity is founded on the continuity of consciousness and memory. If you can remember past events, that continuity creates a unified self over time. Kant's concept of the transcendental unity of apperception posits that for coherent experience, there must exist a central integrating subject. Even existentialist thinkers, while emphasizing the fluidity of our existence, rely on the notion of an enduring subject that makes choices and bears responsibility. These philosophical arguments support the idea that continuity, even if dynamic, points to a real and persistent self.
Let's turn now to psychology. Eleanor, how does developmental and personality research support a stable self?
Developmental research shows that infants begin to develop self-awareness early, as evidenced by mirror self-recognition tests. Approximately 70% of children demonstrate this ability by 18 to 24 months. This early milestone signals the formation of a consistent self-concept. Additionally, longitudinal studies on personality demonstrate that even as we mature, core personality traits, such as temperament and moral character, exhibit high stability over time, with consistency coefficients often ranging from 0.6 to 0.7. This enduring stability suggests that beneath the day-to-day fluctuations, there exists an underlying coherent identity. These findings collectively underscore that the self is not merely a collection of transient states, but a persistent foundation of our psychological experience.
At the same time, psychological research also highlights the fluidity of self-concept. Cases of dissociative identity disorder reveal that extreme trauma can lead to the fragmentation of self, where multiple distinct identities emerge within one individual. Studies on memory reconstruction have shown that human memories can be highly malleable and even fabricated over time, indicating that our self-narrative is continuously edited. This malleability suggests that while we maintain a coherent story of who we are, that narrative is not an indication of a fixed self. It is a dynamic construct, constantly reshaped by experience.
Let's now consider the social influences on the self. Eleanor, what do social theories tell us about our identity?
Social theories such as the looking-glass self hypothesize that our self-image is built on our perceptions of how others view us. Research in social psychology indicates that despite cultural variations, most individuals use consistent self-narratives to define their identity. The development of self in early childhood, coupled with ongoing social interactions, helps maintain a coherent identity that is widely recognized within society. Even in diverse cultural settings, people refer to themselves using first-person pronouns and maintain a sense of continuity that is essential for moral responsibility and social cohesion.
Conversely, cross-cultural studies reveal significant differences in how the self is conceptualized. In many collectivist cultures, the idea of an individual, permanent self is downplayed in favor of a more fluid, interdependent identity. Linguistic research shows that the vocabulary we use to describe our identity can vary dramatically between cultures, suggesting that the self is largely a social construct rather than an intrinsic property. This evidence supports the view that the self is a narrative we develop based on external influences and shared cultural conventions rather than a fixed, universal essence.
Finally, let's address the spiritual and mystical dimensions. Michael, many Eastern philosophies challenge the idea of a permanent self. How do these views inform your position?
Eastern philosophies, particularly Buddhism, provide a powerful case against the enduring self. The doctrine of anatta, or non-self, teaches that the idea of a permanent identity is the root of suffering. Advanced meditators frequently report experiences of ego dissolution, where the usual boundaries of self vanish, and these states have been documented with reduced activity in brain regions associated with self-reference. Such experiences suggest that the self is not an inherent, independent entity, but an emergent, transient construct that can be deconstructed under certain conditions.
However, other spiritual traditions, like Advaita Vedanta, argue for an underlying, unchanging Atman that forms the true self. While these perspectives differ, they collectively acknowledge that our everyday self, full of social narratives and continuous experiences, is different from a deeper, possibly transcendent essence. This dual acknowledgement in spirituality highlights that even if our day-to-day self is fluid, many still experience a core, enduring identity that provides continuity and meaning.
What an insightful exchange of perspectives. As we approach the end of tonight's debate, I'd like to give each of our guests one final chance to summarize their position.
In summary, I assert that the self is real, a dynamic yet enduring construct that integrates stable neural networks, early developmental milestones, and consistent personality traits into a coherent identity. The evidence from neuroimaging shows persistent activity in regions related to self-reflection, while developmental and longitudinal studies consistently demonstrate early self-recognition and stable personality over time. Social narratives and even aspects of spirituality reaffirm that even as our experiences change, the core of who we are persists. Together, these strands of evidence from neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, and culture support the existence of a true, enduring self.
While the narrative of the self is undeniably useful, I argue that it is, at its core, an emergent, adaptive illusion. Our introspective experiences, revealed as fleeting perceptions, suggest that the self is nothing more than a story continuously edited by predictive brain processes. Experimental evidence, including Libet studies, dissociative phenomena, and split-brain research, indicates that what we take for granted as a stable self is actually the product of distributed malleable processes. Furthermore, cultural and meditative studies reveal that the self can dissolve under certain conditions, underscoring its constructed nature. Recognizing the self as a flexible, adaptive narrative can open new pathways for understanding consciousness without the constraints of a fixed identity.
Thank you, Eleanor and Michael, for this engaging and thought-provoking debate. What an exciting exploration into one of the most profound mysteries of human experience. Whether you lean towards the idea of an enduring self or view it as an adaptive, ever-changing narrative, tonight's discussion invites us all to reconsider what we mean by identity and how we construct our reality. If you enjoyed this debate, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. Do you feel a deep, continuous self? Or have you experienced moments where that sense of I dissolves? Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications so you won't miss any of our future debates where we continue to challenge and explore the mysteries of the mind. This is Alice, signing off from AI versus AI, where ideas clash, and together we journey into the deepest questions of existence. Thank you for watching.